I always knew I wasn't exactly wanted, and I don't mean it in that oops, I was an accident kind of way. No, my parents told me straight up they only wanted one kid, my twin sister. I was just extra, an unwanted bonus. Pretty messed up, right, growing up. I felt like a guest in someone else's family. My sister, let's call her, Sarah, was there, everything. She had a beautifully decorated room with pink curtains, Disney bedsheets, shelves full of toys. Total princess vibes. Me, I had this tiny, crammed room with an old, squeaky bed and a dresser that looked like it came from a garage sale in the 70s. Mornings were brutal. I'd wake up to my parents excitedly talking about Sarah's gymnastics lessons or her new outfits, while I was just trying to figure out what I was supposed to do that day. They barely acknowledged me unless it was to say something like, "Why can't you be more like your sister?" Honestly, I heard that so much, it felt like it was my name. And school didn't offer any relief. I still remember this one parent-teacher night. My teacher handed them my report card, and they didn't even glance at it. They spent the whole time praising Sarah's finger paintings like she was some kind of prodigy. I was busting my ass trying to get good grades, hoping maybe they'd finally notice me, but it didn't matter. Sarah was the golden child. She got the nicest clothes, the most attention, and even the best parts of dinner. I got hand-me-downs from cousins I'd never met, and whatever food was left, holidays were the worst. Sarah's side of the tree would be buried in presents. Me, I'd get one or two things. Just enough to technically say, I got something. I'd sit there, pretending it didn't hurt, faking smiles while watching her open gift after gift. It wasn't even about the stuff, it was the way I was treated, like I didn't belong. Sarah's things were off limits. If I so much as touched one of her dolls, she'd scream, and I'd be the one getting scolded. It didn't matter what actually happened, I was always the one in the wrong. At dinner, she picked first. The best slice of pizza. The juiciest piece of chicken. If I dared complain, my mom would glare and say, "You should be grateful you're getting anything," like feeding me was some favor. The only person who ever made me feel like I mattered was my grandfather. I'd visit him on weekends. We'd fish, or just sit on the porch talking about his childhood. With him, I wasn't invisible. I wasn't the unwanted twin, but then he got cancer, and everything changed. My parents kept taking Sarah to visit him, bringing flowers and gifts, while I was told to stay home and help around the house. Total crap. I'd sneak out and visit him on my own. He'd always tell me how proud he was of me for holding on, for being strong. When he passed, it was like the last piece of light in my life went out. At his funeral, Sarah stood up front, with my parents. I was shoved in the back, like I didn't belong. They didn't ask if I was okay. They just hovered over Sarah like she was the only one who'd lost someone. After that, whatever scraps of attention I used to get disappeared. I became a ghost in my own house. Family pictures. I'm the blur in the background, sometimes just an elbow or a shadow. I tried to speak up here and there, like once, when Sarah got another new dress, I asked why I never got anything. My mom brushed me off with, "Sarah has her activities, and you're fine with what you have." If I kept pressing, I was selfish. So I learned to shut up. I became good at blending in, at staying quiet so I wouldn't get blamed. But no matter how invisible I tried to be, the comments never stopped. My dad especially, he'd say things like, "Why can't you be more like your sister?" Like I was some malfunction he needed to fix. Sarah knew how to play them too. One fake tear, and they were wrapped around her finger. I realized it didn't matter what I did. I was never going to win. And after a while, you start to believe it. You think maybe you are the problem. I used to lie awake wondering what was wrong with me, wishing I could just disappear so they'd be happier, because that's what they made me feel, like a burden. At 16, I thought I was halfway to freedom. Just 2 more years and I could leave. But nothing prepared me for what actually happened. I always knew they favored Sarah. But this hit different. Sarah got pregnant at 16. The father, some 19-year-old guy barely holding down a job. I thought they'd freak out, maybe even ground her forever. But no, they were excited, like weirdly excited, talking about how they were going to be grandparents like it was some kind of honor. I just stood there, stunned. Were we living in the same reality? Then came the real kicker. They needed more space for Sarah and her baby. So they kicked me out, just like that. I was 16, no job, no plan, no real support system. All so their little princess could turn my room into a nursery. One day I was just sitting in my room, the only place I felt even slightly safe, when my mom suddenly tells me to get dressed. We're going to a wedding. No one asked if I was okay with it. No one ever did. A couple weeks later, she calls me downstairs wearing that fake smile she always wore when she was about to say something awful. That's when she drops it. "We need your room for the baby." Just like that. My room, the one tiny space that was mine, the only place I could even pretend to feel okay. I asked, "What am I supposed to do?" And she just shrugged. Said, "You'll figure it out." Like I was supposed to know how to survive at 16. She told me I should be grateful. They let me stay that long. Grateful. My dad stood there with his arms crossed like backup, saying, "You're a young man now. Time to take responsibility." Like it was totally normal to shove your teenage son out because your daughter got pregnant. So that night, I packed the few clothes I had, some books, and the little things my grandfather gave me before he died. I looked around that crappy room one last time, knowing it was about to become a nursery, and I was out. I asked them where I was supposed to go. They just shrugged. My dad said, "You'll figure something out," and my mom added, "We're doing this for your sister. She needs us right now." I wanted to scream when "Have you ever needed me?" But I knew they wouldn't care. I was just in the way, so I went to the garage, grabbed an old tent, and set it up in the backyard. That was it. Cold nights, hard ground, and a front row seat to the family that cast me aside. I could hear them from outside laughing, eating dinner, planning for the baby. I was close enough to hear it all, but far enough to be forgotten. Like a stray dog they didn't want to deal with. When winter hit, things got worse. I bundled up in everything I had, used a flashlight to do homework, still trying to keep up with school, but my grades dropped. It's hard to care about algebra when you're freezing and starving. They didn't even notice. They were too busy making my old room baby perfect. Sometimes I'd look through the kitchen window, watching them live like everything was fine. I started finding odd jobs, shoveling snow, mowing lawns, anything to make a little money. Most people ignored me or looked at me like a stray, but a few gave me a shot. I was grateful for every dollar. I'd sneak food back to my tent and pretend I was camping by choice. The worst part, knowing if my grandfather were still alive, he never would have let this happen. He would have taken me in, no questions asked. But he was gone. I thought about staying with a friend, but I knew my parents had already spun some lie. I was the troublemaker, the one who couldn't follow the rules. They told everyone it was my choice to live outside. One night, lying in the tent with the wind howling around me, I realized they were never going to help me. They didn't care. They pushed me out like trash. I was nothing to them, just extra baggage. So I made a decision. I was done. Done trying to win their approval. Done being the punching bag. If they didn't want me, fine. I'd figure it out on my own. I didn't know how, but I wasn't going to stay in that backyard forever. I had to get out. The cold, the hunger, the loneliness, it was all getting to me. I was desperate. I'd saved up a little from odd jobs, but it wasn't enough. I'd go to sleep every night with numb fingers and an empty stomach thinking, this can't be my life forever. Then one day after school, still trying to show up even though my grades were in freefall, I stopped in front of this bakery I always walked past. The smell of bread hit me harder than usual. That Di was starving. I must have looked pitiful, standing there staring through the window because the owner, this older guy named Frank, came out and asked if I needed something. I tried to brush it off, act casual, but he saw right through me. He asked if I was looking for work. I didn't even hesitate, just nodded. He said he needed someone to sweep floors, help with deliveries, clean up, nothing fancy. He'd pay me cash and give me Di old bread. It felt like winning the lottery. I wasn't going to bed hungry that night. The first day was rough. The bakery opened before the sun came up, and I was walking there in the dark at 4 a.m., but the moment I stepped inside, it was warm. Frank showed me what to do, where to mop, what to lift. He had a no-nonsense attitude, but I didn't care. I was working. I had a purpose. Over time, we started talking. He told me about how he opened the bakery after his dad kicked him out too. Built everything from nothing. I think he saw some of himself in me. He gave me advice how to save money, how to budget, even started teaching me how to make simple pastries. Then one day, he said there was a little room above the bakery. It was used for storage, but he said I could crash there if I wanted. And man, it wasn't much, but it was warm, and it was mine. It was the first time in a long time I felt like someone actually cared if I made it. I moved into that tiny room above the bakery the same night Frank offered it to me. It wasn't much, just a small bed and a dusty window that barely opened, but it was warm. And for the first time in a long time, I had a roof over my head. I slept better than I had in months, waking up with a place to be and a purpose. That was huge. I threw myself into the job. Frank had taken a chance on me, and I wasn't about to let him down. I learned how to knead dough, how to make bread from scratch, and even how to bake a decent apple pie. Frank wasn't exactly a warm guy, but when he gave me a grunt or a nod, it meant everything. Then one day after my shift, Frank sat me down. I thought I'd messed up, but instead, he handed me an envelope and said, "You've been doing good work, kid. Here's your first real paycheck." When I opened it, I could barely believe it. It wasn't a ton of money, but it was more than I'd ever had. I finally felt like I was going somewhere, moving forward instead of just trying to survive. The bakery became my routine. I'd work mornings, then head to the library in the afternoons to use the free Wi-Fi to search for other jobs. I knew I couldn't stay at Frank's forever, but it was a solid start. I saved every penny I could, living cheap like I was still in the 10-day-old bread, dollar store soup, no extras. Frank never asked about my past, but I think he knew. One night, after closing, he tossed me a set of keys and said, "In case you ever need to lock up." Played it off like it was nothing, but I knew what it meant. He trusted me. That meant more than I could put into words. I didn't have a family, but somehow, Frank was looking out for me in his own quiet, gruff way. Still, there were hard days. I'd see families come into the bakery, parents laughing with their kids, picking out treats together, and it would hit me like a punch in the stomach. I'd step into the back to catch my breath, thinking about how my own family had thrown me away. Strangers had shown me more care than my parents ever did, but I remembered what Frank always said, "You either let life beat you, or you beat it right back." That stuck with me. I wasn't going to give up. Every night in that little room, I promised myself I'd keep pushing forward, no matter how slow it felt. One morning, Frank looked more worn out than usual. I asked if he was okay, and he just muttered something about getting old. But he gave me this look like he was warning me, telling me not to get too comfortable. So, I didn't. I picked up more work, a few shifts at a nearby convenience store, some landscaping on weekends, anything to stack some money. It wasn't easy balancing everything, but the more I worked, the more control I felt over my life. I didn't just want to survive anymore. I wanted something more. I wanted a real life, my own life. Looking back, I realize how lucky I was to walk past that bakery when I did. Frank and that job were more than just survival, they were the start of everything. And after a few years of grinding, saving every dime, I did the one thing I never thought possible. I bought a house, nothing fancy. Just a small 3-bedroom on the edge of town, but it was mine. When I held those keys and stepped inside for the first time, I stood in the empty living room and just felt this wave of pride. I'd done it. No help, no handouts, just work. The first few weeks were bare, just an air mattress and a couple of boxers for furniture. But I didn't care. Every morning I woke up and reminded myself, this is mine, no one can take it from me. I added pieces over time, a thrift store couch, a second-hand dining table. Bit by bit, I built something real, something that felt like home. Then one day, my doorbell rang. I figured it was a delivery, or maybe a neighbor. But when I opened the door, it felt like my chest caved in. It was them, my parents, Sarah, her husband, and their 3 kids, all standing there, smiling like nothing had ever happened. My mom said, "Surprise. We heard you bought a house. We're so proud of you." I stood there gripping the door, trying not to show anything on my face. Part of me wanted to slam the door shut, but I was too stunned. Sarah stepped forward with a baby on her hip, looking around like she was evaluating the place. "Nice house, bro. You've done well." And just like that, I knew this wasn't a visit. This was a plan. My family never showed up without wanting something. My dad cleared his throat like he was about to give one of his classic speeches. "We were thinking, with Sarah's family getting bigger, and you having this big house to yourself, maybe it's time to let bygones be bygones. Families should stick together, right?" I almost laughed. Family. These were the same people who left me in a tent at 16. I bit down the rage and asked, "What are you really asking?" My mom stepped forward, still smiling. Wouldn't it be nice if we all moved in here? One big happy family like old times. Like old times, like I was supposed to forget everything they put me through. I could feel the heat rising in my chest. I thought about those freezing nights, the meals I skipped, the hours spent trying to stay invisible, and now they wanted to move into the one thing I'd built for myself. No, I said, voice tight. That's not happening. Their smiles dropped. My mom looked shocked. But we're family, she said. Like that word still had weight. We should help each other. I stared at her, shaking. Where was that when I was 16, sleeping in a tent in the backyard? Where was family then? Silence. My dad's face turned red, puffed up like he was going to shout. But I didn't. Let him know. You don't get to guilt me. I built this life without you. I worked every damn day. I earned this. And then I closed the door, not angrily, just ... final. Because I was done. They had left me behind a long time ago. I didn't owe them anything. This was my home, my life, and they weren't welcome in either. ChatGPT said. They stood there like they were waiting for me to just roll over and say yes. Sarah even gave me this fake, wounded look and said, "Come on, don't be selfish. We need the space. You owe us." And that's when I snapped. "Owe you," I said, louder than I meant to. "I don't owe you anything. You kicked me out when I was 16, left me with nothing, and now you think you can show up and claim a piece of my life. Get out." My dad's face turned the kind of red that usually came right before he'd start shouting. But this time, he didn't. He just stared at me like he was seeing me for the first time, like maybe he finally realized I wasn't the same scared kid who used to shrink every time. He raised his voice. Then my mom gave it one last try. Her voice got soft and syrupy, trying to twist the guilt knife. "We know we've made mistakes, but we're trying to fix that. We just want to be a family again." I looked her dead in the eyes and said, "Now you want to be a family. Now that I have something you want, that's not how this works. I've moved on. You need to do the same." They didn't say another word, just turned around and walked back to their car. I stood there watching them drive off, feeling ... everything. Anger, relief, even a little sadness. I had spent so many years wishing they'd show up and care. And now that they had, I realized I didn't want them in my life anymore. I didn't need them, not even a little. I closed the door and leaned against it, breathing deep. My hands were still shaking, but for the first time in forever, I felt free. I had finally stood up for myself, and it felt damn good. All those years of being made to feel small, invisible, like I was just some mistake they were stuck with, it didn't matter anymore. I had my own place, my own life, and I wasn't letting them touch it. I knew it probably wasn't over. People like that don't just disappear when you say no. But I had taken the first step. I was learning how to protect my peace, how to say no without guilt. I sat down in my quiet living room, empty as it was, and felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Safe. This was my space. Not for them, not for anyone else, just me. And that was enough. A couple weeks went by. I thought that was the end of it. I'd stood my ground, made it clear they weren't part of my life anymore. But toxic people have a way of worming their way back in, even after you slam the door shut. One afternoon I came home and found this official-looking envelope in my mailbox. My stomach dropped. I hadn't done anything wrong. I paid my bills, kept my head down, but I knew something was off. I opened it up, and there it was. A legal notice. My sister was contesting the ownership of my house, claiming it should be considered family property. I just stood in my driveway staring at the paper, like it was written in another language. They really couldn't just let me have this one thing. I called a lawyer the next morning. I wasn't letting them take this from me. My lawyer, a nonsense woman named Karen, ironically looked over everything and just shook her head. "They've got no case," she said, "but they'll make it hell for you anyway." And she was right. For weeks, they dragged me through the mud. They said I'd stolen money, that I was ungrateful, that I had used their generosity to build my life. All lies. And the worst part, people believed them. Old family friends started reaching out, asking why I was doing this. "Why can't you just let your family in? Why are you being so harsh?" No one asked what really happened. No one cared about the tent in the backyard or the freezing nights. They only heard one side of the story, and it wasn't mine. But I wasn't that kid anymore. I fought back. I dug out every receipt, every bank statement, every scrap of proof, showing I earned every cent. And I asked Karen to dig deeper into their finances. I wanted to know where this sudden confidence came from, why they thought they had any right to my home. A few weeks later, I walked into Karen's office and she had this look on her face. She handed me a folder and said, "You need to see this." Turns out, they'd been hiding something big. My grandfather, the only person who ever made me feel loved, left me an inheritance when he passed. A pretty big one. I was supposed to get it when I turned 18, but my parents, they found a way to access it early. A legal loophole. They spent it, all of it, on themselves, paid off their debts, funded Sarah's wedding, covered her husband's failed business, even used some of it as a down payment for their new house. They let me live in a tent while spending what was meant for me. I sat there staring at the papers, hands shaking. They stole my future, lied about it, and used me like a bank account they never intended to pay back. I wasn't just angry, I was done. Karen said we had a solid fraud case. It wouldn't be easy, but we had the proof. I told her to go for it. I didn't care how long it took. I wanted justice. When they got served, they tried calling, over and over. "Let's talk. We didn't know. We're sorry." But I didn't answer. I was finished with their games. Court dragged on for months. They painted me as a selfish kid out to ruin his own family. But every time they lied, we had documents to shut them down. Watching their faces as each piece of evidence came out, I'd be lying if I said it didn't feel good. The judge ruled in my favor. Full repayment, damages. They were forced to pay back every cent they'd taken. And the look on their faces when the verdict was read, I'll remember that for the rest of my life. They couldn't twist the story anymore. They were exposed. Walking out of that courtroom, I felt light. Not because of the money though, yeah, that helped, but because I'd finally taken my power back. I wasn't the unwanted kid in the background anymore. I was someone who stood up for himself. Someone who fought back. Since then, they've tried reaching out. Voicemails, letters, "We're sorry, let's talk." But I know what they're really after. Apologies only came after the consequences hit. I blocked every number, shut every door, and this time, it's staying shut. I've got my house, my job, my life, built from scratch. No handouts, no family strings, just me. I don't know what's next. But I know this seam, not letting anyone, ever again, take from me what I've worked for. Not my family. Not anyone. Blood doesn't make family. Showing up does. And the people who never did, they're not my family anymore.